Hello everyone, I'm Alexis Papahelas. I'm the managing editor of Kathimerini, and I'm glad to participate in this second ISTMED forum by the Delphi Forum. And I'm especially glad to have with me Mr. David Harris, who's the CEO of the American Jewish Community. Good evening, David. Good to see you.
Nice to be with you.
It's been a while since we have seen you here in Greece. I suppose that's because of COVID.
It's been a while since I've left New York.
Okay, that's a good point. Well, first of all, I want to ask you, we had this conversation about a year ago. And you were very optimistic about the blossoming of this relationship between Greece, Israel, Cyprus, and to some extent Egypt. Looking back now, in this year that has lapsed, do you think this has grown more mature, stronger? What's your assessment?
So first of all, it's a pleasure to be back, and thank you to the Delphi Forum. Yes, I was optimistic a year ago, and I remain optimistic today. For the viewers who may not know the background or context, the American Jewish Committee, beginning in the 1980s, at a time when relations among Greece, Cyprus, and Israel were really quite chilly. In fact, Greece had not yet achieved full de jure diplomatic relations with the state of Israel, which didn't come until 1990. This seemed like a very distant dream, Alexis. But today we have a flourishing, what I would call a strategic triangle among Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. And I would add that the United States has become an increasingly important component part of this process. And as you suggested, and as I mentioned already a year ago, the hope is to bring in some other countries as well. You mentioned Egypt. Egypt is involved in some respects. There are certain countries in the Balkans, including Bulgaria, that have been watching this process closely as well. So as I look ahead, I see the possibilities both for deepening the existing strategic triangle and also for extending it.
Now, also recently we had this rapprochement between the Emirates and Israel and also Saudi Arabia. Do you think this sort of alliance could expand based on these latest developments also, in that direction?
I think there's no question. Again, it may not expand in a linear fashion, but what's emerging are a growing network of, let's call them like-minded countries. And as you said, and it is to the credit of the Trump administration, the Abraham Accords that were signed in September now bring the UAE and Bahrain into the, if you will, the peace bloc in the Middle East. And as we've seen, the the speed with which the UAE and Israel have moved forward is really quite breathtaking, with Bahrain only a step or two behind. And since then, of course, we've now added Sudan and most recently Morocco to the peace bloc. So we have 6 Arab countries, beginning with Egypt and Jordan, that are now formally at peace with normalized relations with the state of Israel. We have several other Arab countries who are not quite there, but have moved forward quite significantly. And I think the implications for the region are quite substantial, because the momentum is with this bloc. And again, I add to it Greece and Cyprus, and potentially other countries in the Balkans and the Mediterranean region. And if we look ahead, we can see sort of layers of deepening cooperation that may begin in some cases with energy, in other cases with economic or cultural or trade, but ultimately do have a very important strategic dimension to them as well.
Now, you have noticed, I'm sure yourself, that President Trump had a bit of a soft spot towards Erdogan. We're not quite sure why. But let me ask you, do you think that was the case? And how do you explain that yourself? Because you've been very critical of President Erdogan yourself, I know that.
Well, I think to be absolutely fair, the last 3 U.S. presidents have had a soft spot for Erdogan's Turkey. And I say this from very personal knowledge. In early 2003, after Erdogan became prime minister, an American Jewish Committee delegation went to Ankara. We sat with him for about 90 minutes. I've probably participated by now in literally thousands of diplomatic meetings. That was among the chilliest. And he was new to the job and presumably trying to make a good impression.
Mhm.
And we left that meeting with a sense that he was taking Turkey in a very different direction. And we took that message from Ankara back to Washington, and by the way, other capitals. At the time, of course, there was President Bush in office. We continued to believe that, and everything we saw in the ensuing years suggested that, indeed, Erdogan was going in a different direction. We repeated the message to President Obama and his administration, and we repeated the message to President Trump. By the way, I need to add, uh, traditionally we have been good friends of Turkey. If one goes to Adapazarı in Turkey, for example, there is the American Jewish Committee School we built um, together with our friends in Israel, who collectively built a village after the devastating earthquake. The school in that village was a gift of the American Jewish Committee, as just one illustration of the traditional relationship we have with Turkey. But facts are facts, and wishful thinking cannot replace analytical thinking. And so we conveyed the message to President Bush, we conveyed the message to President Obama, we conveyed the message to President Trump and their administrations, and for a variety of reasons, they listened at best with one ear, or perhaps did not listen at all. They were too invested in Turkey. Turkey was too important to the strategic map of the United States. Its geographic location, its hosting of air bases that are important to us. And particularly in the case, I think, of President Obama, there was this kind of wishful notion that Turkey could present a model of the marriage of modernity and Islam. And when the so-called Arab Spring, and I put it in quotation marks, surfaced, this intensified the American belief that Turkey could provide this model. Well, we argued it could not. And I'm sorry to say that in all three cases, all three administrations, they succumbed a bit to the sort of siren song of Erdogan, and to the belief that we had to stay on the same side with him. I think it was a strategic mistake, and we're seeing the consequences of it now.
Now, one thing we've noticed in the last few months of the Trump administration is that there seem to be two lines. One is, from the White House with President Trump, and there's another which is, quite a bit tougher, I would say, in terms of Turkish policy, expressed by Secretary Pompeo. Is there such a dichotomy, or is that a real perception?
I can't take you behind the scenes to tell you whether
Oh,
this
you're
is,
very plugged in that now, so you must know what's going on.
whether this is the good cop, bad cop. Governments have been known to do this, but look at the United States Congress in particular. And since we last met, look at the dramatic leap forward in the Eastern Med Strategic Partnership Act. This has broken entirely new ground, and the administration has clearly gone along with this. And look at the fact that just in recent days, almost hours, Alexis, um, the State Department announced new sanctions on Turkey because of its purchase of the S-400 missile defense systems. Strong language coming from the State Department. Look, at the end of the day, uh, there are not separate governments under one roof. What's happening surely had the approval of the White House, even if the White House may have chosen different language. But at the end of the day, one government policy, and that government policy has gotten tougher on Turkey because despite all of the efforts, and if one reads the State Department language clearly, it says, I'm paraphrasing, despite repeated efforts to explain to Turkey how the purchase of the S-400 would endanger American security, American personnel, Turkey decided to go forward. So this was not a casual decision by the U.S. But at the end of the day, they saw in Erdogan if I may say so, some of the elements that we've seen in Erdogan since 2003. He, I think he's overplayed his hand. Uh, that's my view. But clearly, the Europeans, the Americans, much of the Arab world today see Turkey very differently and much more clearly than they had in the past. And I don't think it's going to benefit Erdogan's Turkey.
Now, do you think we're going to see any dramatic policy changes when the new administration comes in? For example, we've heard that there is a desire to have a strategic review of U.S.-Turkish relations. Do you expect any major sort of review or moves and so on?
I would not be surprised. Those who know Joe Biden, and I think where you're sitting in Athens and in Nicosia, there are many who know Joe Biden very well. He's not a newcomer. I mean, when Barack Obama became president, when Bill Clinton became president, they were largely new to global foreign policy. Joe Biden is anything but new to global foreign policy. Given his Senate record, chairmanship of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, vice president of the United States, he knows the world well, and he knows the Eastern Med particularly well, and he feels very close ties over a long period of time, very personal ties to Greece and Cyprus. So I think Turkey is going to be scrutinized very carefully by the incoming administration, and what they're going to see, we know, are consistent violations of human rights. I think Turkey today is number 2 in the world in the imprisonment of journalists, only after China. Turkey's efforts to flex its muscles throughout the Mediterranean. Turkey's partnership with the Muslim Brotherhood, its hosting of Hamas in Turkey, its occasional coziness with Iran and with Russia. And I think it's going to be very clear to the new administration that something has to be done, a message has to be sent. And I suspect it will be quite soon.
But what do you think it would take for this, this attitude that, that nobody wants to have a debate about who lost Turkey, let's say? There's this real fear, anxiety. You can see the Defense Department, State, and so on. What do you think it would take for that to really, change in a dramatic way?
I think it's in the process of changing. I think that's quite clear. And we know, certainly in the current administration, that much more attention has been paid to Greece as a strategic partner of the United States, not just as a historical, cultural, tourist trade partner. And I give a special shout out here to Ambassador Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador. But all of the sort of discussions between the United States and Greece around defense, military, strategic issues is a reflection of the fact that the United States understands that we may have to rethink some of our longstanding assumptions, and we may have to redeploy some of our assets. And if that's the case, and we have to rethink Turkey, then Greece becomes a very natural partner for discussion.
Now, there have been some overtures by the Erdogan government towards Israel in the past few weeks, claiming that, there might be a rapprochement of some sort. Do you see any potential in that, or you think the rift is just too deep?
I don't mean to be cute, but I think the answer to the question is yes, meaning yes and yes. I'm not surprised that Turkey, as I said a few moments ago, may now realize it's overplayed its hand. And by the way, it picked the wrong side. I mean, the momentum is with the other side. I mean, Turkey joined with Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, to some degree Russia, although the relationship between Turkey and Russia is not a simple, uncomplicated relationship. But where is the momentum? The momentum is with Greece, Cyprus, Israel, the UAE, Bahrain. Let me throw into the picture Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco. And increasingly within Europe a recognition that here is where the center of gravity is, here is where the momentum is, and here is where the pro-Western orientation is. So I think Erdogan tactically, not strategically, tactically, has decided that maybe making some overtures to Israel might score him some points. From Israel's point of view, it's probably better to have a cool peace with Turkey than a hot conflict, even if it's a non-military conflict. So sure, I mean, from Israel's point of view, they would like to have relations once again with Turkey as they have with an increasing number of countries in the world. In fact, today there are very few countries in the world with which Israel does not have ties. But I think there's a greater sort of sobriety, a greater realism in Israel that there are limits to the relationship between Israel and Turkey so long as Erdogan leads the country and so long as he embraces an Islamist sort of neo-Ottoman ideology, which fundamentally is at odds with Western values and certainly with the state of Israel. You cannot host Hamas on your territory, offer its leadership support, financing, protection on the one hand, and on the other hand, extend a hand to Israel. Let's be clear. Hamas is a terror organization that openly seeks the destruction of the state of Israel. So if Turkey is going to reach out to Israel, it's going to have to make some much bigger decisions, including, for example, whether it's going to continue to embrace Hamas or not.
Now, one of the big unknowns is what kind of policy the new administration is going to follow towards Iran. What's your take on that? You think it will be a dramatic change from what President Trump was doing?
That's a discussion for a much longer conversation, and I know that we don't have unlimited time. I think this is going to be one of the probably clearest changes of direction between the current Trump administration and the Biden administration. Again, let's just look at sort of the circumstance. The Biden administration embraces much of the Obama national security and foreign policy team. Indeed, Biden himself was part of it for 8 years. Their signature foreign policy achievement in their own minds was the JCPOA in 2015. By 2018, President Trump had withdrawn from the deal, having called it many times, arguably the worst negotiated deal in the history of negotiations. That was a slap in the face to the Obama administration. Clearly, President-elect Biden, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Secretary of State designate Tony Blinken, go down the list, were all invested in the original deal. So they're going to be looking for a way to re-enter the deal. The question will be, and the question we're asking, will they first seek to re-enter the deal as it was written and try to renegotiate it from inside? Or will they first try to renegotiate the deal before re-entering? That's a question that remains to be decided in Washington, I believe, in conversations with Brussels, London, Paris, and Berlin. And ultimately, we have to remember the JCPOA also includes 2 other countries which have a very different interest in the deal than the rest. And those are, of course, China and Russia.
Okay, and lastly, let me ask you, what kind of advice would you give the Greek Prime Minister? A new administration is coming in a few weeks. What should he watch out for? What are the first moves he should do?
Well, I have to be careful on that because I'm not allowed by American law to give advice to foreign leaders. But having said that, I think it's clear that the U.S.-Greek bilateral relationship is on a very steep upward trajectory. It's a very exciting trajectory. Again, I give credit to the current administration. I give credit to the government of my dear friend, Prime Minister Mitsotakis. And I again give a shout out to American Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt. I don't see any reason why that trajectory should not continue to go upward. As I said earlier, Joe Biden has a very special place in his heart for Greece. And now, if you add all of the implications of the U.S.-Greek relationship for American security interests, uh, for America's larger interest in the Eastern Med, I'm quite bullish on the future of the relationship, and I think that one will definitely survive the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration.
Okay, thank you, David. It was enlightening, as usual, to discuss these issues with you, and hope to see you in Athens soon.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in Greece.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night from me.